And newly inaugurated Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro says he's open to the possibility of hosting a U.S. military base in the near future in his country. His comments were made during an interview with a Brazilian TV network on Thursday. And also that day, Bolsonaro met with his new cabinet, which is made up of 22 ministers, 7 of whom have military backgrounds. The conservative leader is taking the reins of Latin America's largest and most populous nation with promises to combat corruption and violence. He's also vowed to eradicate the centrist and leftist politics of the previous governments. To talk more about this, I'm being joined now by former UK Member of Parliament, George Galloway. Hi there, George. So, as we know, he is called the Trump of the tropics, and he's now floated the idea of allowing the U.S. a permanent military base in Brazil. What sort of ramifications might this have?
The Trump of the tropics, just not quite so orange, but he's quite so populist, and he ran on these populist tropes which got him elected. Principally left-of-centre governments around the world have been for decades actually neglecting the bread and butter politics of their countries in favour of identity politics and so forth. They had allowed crime and murder to become rampant in the country. Corruption was thought to be endemic. It may well get worse, of course, now because corruption's not a left or a right thing. And he's there now in power. And he's not so much welcoming Donald Trump as lying at his feet and simpering. He's asked for, effectively, an American base. He has said he's going to move the Brazilian embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, described that as a done deal. This is all follow my leader, and in this case, the leader is Donald Trump. So Bolsonaro is probably the only politician in the entire world that is right now betting his house on Donald Trump.
And I think that's very important to underscore for the viewers. Corruption is not a left or a right problem. It's a political problem in many, I would say all governments. And Bolsonaro has also continued to ramp up his rhetoric on his neighbor, Venezuela, along with Cuba and Nicaragua, calling them troika of tyranny. That's the new term, I guess, for axis of evil. So how dangerous is this sort of language, this rhetoric? How might this affect Latin American political landscapes coming?
Well, it's quite dangerous. Colombia recently, you might be surprised to learn, joined NATO, though it's a long way from the North Atlantic. And if Brazil now has United States military bases in its country, and Brazil has a border with Venezuela, as does Colombia, it's not hard to work out how a conflict could arise, a provocation, series of provocations, Venezuelan retaliation, American involvement on behalf of a NATO associate. It is quite a significant ramping up of tensions in the region. The anti-Cuba rhetoric is par for the course. But Nicaragua appears to have moved firmly into an axis of evil after a brief period of being thought not too bad a thing. So much so the United States asked if they could have military forces in Nicaragua just months ago, it seems. So yes, the Latin American theater has come alive again in East-West rivalry in Cold War terms, and who knows if that might turn hot.
And how about this? He's also criticizing Venezuela for its relationship with Russia. In fact, in a recent TV interview with the Brazilian TV network, he said he's concerned about the Russian Air Force participating in military drills in Venezuela. Thoughts on that?
Actually, he called them Soviet forces. He's not very bright, is Bolsonaro. He doesn't realize the Soviet Union is 30 years dead. He talked about Chinese and Soviet forces. Well, there were a couple of aeroplanes from Russia in Venezuela for a couple of days. That's quite far short of inviting the U.S. to have military bases in your country. I think it would be a mistake for him to bring the U.S. military into Brazil, would provide a focal point for opposition, because I think the time of foreign military bases in your country against the will of the majority, I'm sure, of Brazilians is probably past.
And George, while I still have you, I want to ask one thing about Brazil in particular. They have the dubious distinction of being the world leader in homicides. In 2017, they recorded nearly 64,000 homicides, 70% of that number committed by firearms. Now, the homicide rate 6 times higher, believe it or not, than the U.S. Now Bolsonaro is promising to loosen the country's currently strict gun laws. What about that?
Well, again, he's following the United States. They seem to have the view that the more guns that are in the hands of the people, the less gun crime there might be, against all the evidence. But I do blame the so-called Workers' Party of Brazil, and indeed left-of-centre parties everywhere, for being absolutely soft and hollow on crime, because this crime affected the poorest people in Brazil most. The richest people had their own private security and high walls and fences. But in the barrios, amongst the poor, it was them who were suffering crime the most. And left-of-centre governments in Venezuela and Brazil have completely failed to get to grips with this. And in Brazil, the party paid the price.
George Galloway, your insights much appreciated. Thank you.
Hey YouTube, thanks for checking out our channel. We hope you enjoyed the video. We have tons of content for you just like this. For more of RT America's one-of-a-kind news and analysis, be sure to subscribe and never stop questioning more.